Apart from misguided use of evidence to support Mandela Effect as being automatically debunking, let's entertain the mistake for a moment and admit the video footage of David Letterman and many others, including Anne Rice herself, allegedly saying interview with a vampire. First, as it occurred to the believers, the idea of influence with misinformation, as mentioned earlier, had possibly shaped what we believed to be the name of the movie. Because people such as Letterman, actors involved who are not immune to error, and many other influential people constantly and nonchalantly said interview with a vampire, was it possible we automatically assumed the same, barring astuteness or concern for that matter in checking the title? That we perhaps made a mistake in what we believed it was, as well as completely taking influential people's word for it? Maybe we assumed because figures of influence said something a certain way, and we went along with it, it must have been true. As if they are infallible human beings who don't make mistakes, who don't gloss over detail, and that we, the viewers, don't carry error through time, assuming it correct. In this case, like many others, most likely it's not even really a point of concern. Do you think that sorting out some kinds of grammatical karma was constantly on these people's minds? You think that they stopped themselves in concern of grammar police, ordering and organizing their indefinite articles like and an from definite articles like the? Do you really think it mattered to anybody? Do you actually think this stupid example of or the would even be a thought for you right now if the Mandela Effect had never existed? Or do you think it's just human blunder, mix-ups, inattention to inconsequential detail? In a moment, I will actually demonstrate with audio that most of these people, if not all, are not saying and are actually saying the. The questions I ask above are still pertinent in general in analyzing this convention. For one, because other examples in the future may precisely reflect these above points, and two, a specific incidence of this example may reflect those points, so it is needed to be said. Before we listen to the audio, let's examine their rationale. Groundless reasoning about the plot is also used to argue that it has always been a vampire. They claim saying the vampire emphasizes only one vampire, so it can't be correct that it must be a vampire denoting any one of the vampire characters at any given time. But look at the story, the author's intention. Stop speculating unnecessarily and making things up. From the official Anne Rice website, here's a snippet of the synopsis of the author's story. Quote, "This is the story of Lewis as told in his own words, of his journey through mortal and immortal life. Lewis recounts how he became a vampire at the hands of the radiant and sinister Lestat, and how he became indoctrinated unwillingly into the vampire way of life. His story ebbs and flows to the streets of New Orleans, defining crucial moments such as his discovery of the exquisite lost young child Claudia, wanting not to hurt but to comfort her with the last breaths of humanity he has inside." The interview is obviously about Brad Pitt's character Lewis, a bicentennial vampire telling his story to an eager biographer. The fact that there are other vampire characters in the story is irrelevant. The movie is centered around the interview, which is conducted with the main storytelling vampire. The vampire, the one, the focus. The subtitle, The Vampire Chronicles, again is not in reference to the multiple vampires in the story, but as part of a series that includes other stories. They range from 1976 all the way through 2014. Now onward to the audio. I know many insist to reference this now popular montage video of all the influential and famous people, including Anne Rice herself, supposedly saying, "Interview with a vampire." Well, they aren't actually. I want to stress, I don't like arguments of memory or using fragments of ambiguous evidence that can be perceived either way. But I went ahead and pulled in all of the audio into my digital audio workstation to examine it closely. Some of the individuals mutter the line, some don't pronounce the words clearly, some speak rapidly or with an accent. One could imagine that it is easy to confuse the sounds in real time. I think something akin to a mondegreen. This is an audio phenomenon where a word is misheard as another, such as misheard lyrics. A vampire can sound like or rhyme with the vampire and vice versa. It's comical too, because the excited Mandela Effect believer who made that montage video, thinking they found the holy grail of proof, completely ignores the original, intended subtitles. In particular, subtitles during the Anne Rice interview and during the Oscars footage, there is on-screen text clearly reading, "Interview with the vampire." The individual simply pasted "a vampire" right over the subtitles and texts, forcing a McGurk effect, and ignoring what has always been there simultaneously with the so-called proof. In fact, they do this pasting throughout the entire video, using the McGurk effect as a tool of suggestibility. So let's listen to my audio now without any visual, just audio. I've used some sophisticated tools in my audio arsenal to slow down the audio without much artifact.
Would the motion picture interview with the vampire?
Elliot Goldenthal for Interview with the Vampire.
Hi, I'm Neil Jordan, and I'm here to introduce Interview with the Vampire.
Interview with the Vampire.
Story called Interview with the Vampire, and I kept it for about 2.
Especially Interview with the Vampire because it's from
Interview with the Vampire.
and I like the book Interview with the Vampire
On an interview with the vampire. Waited, interview with the vampire. Interview with the vampire. Interview with the vampire.
Then danced. Interview with the vampire.
An Interview with the Vampire.
They show Interview with the Vampire.
I love doing an Interview with the Vampire.
Interview with the Vampire. Interview with the Vampire. Interview with the Vampire.
Interview with the Vampire.
Interview with the Vampire.
Interview with the vampire. Interview with the vampire.
Interview with the Vampire.
Without distraction of suggestibility or McGurk effect, and the audio slowed down, we can clearly hear them say "the." You can make out the voiced dental fricative created by the TH. This montage video fails to prove they all said "interview with a vampire," a poor attempt at proof. I think my audio demonstration speaks for itself. Remember, however, evidence with simultaneous proof, such as this montage, is already automatically debunking. The fact we now hear these people clearly say "the vampire" doesn't take away from what I said initially in this section. Because I am certain there can probably be evidence found of interview with a vampire, it still stands that it is inconsequential and a trite oversight that ultimately doesn't matter. To address simultaneous evidence again, let's assume we found evidence showing the use of a vampire, or in that video, let's assume they all say a vampire. Okay, we'll humor it for a moment. But what of the other video interviews before and after this date, which is important to note, where not only Rice but many others clearly say the vampire? What about official legal records showing the vampire before and after the date? What about endless newspaper and magazine articles that show a mix of a vampire or the vampire at differing times without chronology? You see, if you're going to insist on the use of evidence as holding water in defense of Mandela effects, which I reiterate doesn't hold water, then you must consider all of the evidence. But they never do, it seems. It seems they ignore other pieces of evidence, even when it is part of the same medium. Because when you look at all of the evidence, it eliminates the metaphysical nexus point of change. They don't want to burst the fantasy bubble. Further, when the chronology in the evidence is especially lacking, it really just brings this all back down to earth. It indeed bursts that bubble. Through the historical timeline, influential and common people alike casually switch between a vampire and the vampire, back and forth without thought to consequence, because there really isn't any. Save, I suppose, for the insane response from the Mandela Effect followers. In looking at copyright records regarding this title, one finds a mix of the varying titles. There are records going back to 1978, where she or her representation recorded it as Interview with the Vampire every single time. Interestingly enough, a copyright of her book after those dates in 2003 and a poster promoting the movie have the same recordation dates. And yet one says a vampire and the other the vampire. Not only do records show use of a vampire and the vampire in no chronological order whatever, but also of the same recordation date. Again, this is important in automatic debunking. In the same vein, if our timeline of evidence shows mixed use of a vampire and the vampire in no particular chronological order, we can infer nobody really had a concern as to which insignificant word they used. It also reveals there was no convergent moment when it all changed due to Mandela Effect. And these so-called evidences are really just proof of the breezy attitude towards inconsequential things. A vampire and the vampire are very interchangeable in the auditory sense. Here's Anne Rice saying Interview with the Vampire at least twice on Larry King very shortly after the movie release, circa November 1994.
Possible for me. And also I was invited over and over again to get involved again with Interview with the Vampire. David Geffen, who's really the full adaptation of the book. I mean, you could walk in, off the street and you would know this was Interview with the Vampire. If you'd read it 15 years ago and barely remembered it, you'd recognize it.
In an interview with Rice on Charlie Rose in 1998, Charlie says
penned her first novel in 1976 with Interview with the Vampire. Her more recent works.
And in 1995, another interview with Rice called Interview with the Author demonstrates that the is correct since they named that interview as a play on the title of Rice's story. The montage video shows some of this, mind you, and since my slowed down audio shows use of the vampire, using this clip to prove otherwise is doubly silly. Precisely because if you still don't want to believe the audio, the actual evidence, the title of that interview overtly displays once again simultaneous evidence. This throws the video as proof for Mandela Effect out the window altogether, even if you don't want to believe the slowed audio. The use of these words in place of one another is meaningless and inconsequential. The point is not about how consequential this change is, but how the inconsequential and sometimes the important details are muddled, confused, or misconceived. It's about human convention, how we handle and convey information, whether misheard, influenced to remember it a certain way, or are victims of conflation. Are we going to continue to look too much into this, or concede that human beings fudge things all the time? The most solid evidence as far as what was actually said is indeed the audio of that montage, slowed down as I've shown. But probably the best piece of debunking evidence for illustrating debunking components simultaneous evidence is this newspaper article, as it typifies ontological discrepancy. Now, evidence like this really just pops the delusion bubble. In this article, in a moment of absent-mindedness and perhaps haste, the title was printed incorrectly as Interview with a Vampire under the movie listing section. Literally a few inches away is a big poster advert of the film. That is, an official poster that reads, "Wouldn't you know it, Interview with the Vampire." For any reasonable person on the fence about this so-called effect, this should serve as a sample of the human convention and blunder you'll get. It should pull you back on the side of sanity and reason. It's one thing to write about the use of evidence in logical fallacy as I did, and then another thing to then humor the evidence anyway, but show contradictions as I did. It's yet an entirely different animal altogether, and a gem of a find when the two elusive pieces of so-called different reality evidence are right there smack on the same medium, living happily together. Is there anything more mundane than that? A mix-up, a misprint? Is there anything else that so beautifully typifies how prone we are to error and inadvertence? In truth, this and the audio should have been my sole pieces of evidence to make this case. Well, for the reasonable individuals anyway. As a quick but related aside, it's funny to point out in the montage while presenting an award, Juliette Lewis incidentally says a colleague's name mistakenly and immediately corrects herself. This is not necessarily proof of anything, except human beings make errors, and one can imagine, had she not corrected it right then and there, somebody would have posted that Kirsten Dunst's name magically changed because of Mandela Effect.